The gentle hum of a sun-drenched afternoon park offered a perfect urban escape. Laughter chakad K plus playing, mingled with the soft murmur of conversations from scattered groups enjoying the green expanse. A symphony of simple joys under a clear blue sky. Amidst this everyday canvas, a familiar figure, Keanu Reeves, sought a quiet moment of anonymity, a simple spectator to life's unscripted play. But the day's unassuming peace was a fragile veneer, soon to be fractured by an act of casual cruelty that would test the character of all who witnessed it, and perhaps redefine heroism in the most unexpected way, far from the silver screen's scripted valor. The scene was deceptively ordinary. A man walked his dog, a common enough sight. Yet an unsettling discordance began to prick at the edges of the park's harmony. The dog, a medium-sized terrier mix, trotted with a nervous, hesitant gait, its tail tucked low, a stark contrast to the joyful abandon of other pets nearby. The man, a stocky figure in a faded baseball cap, held the leash with a white-knuckled grip, his muttered words too low to discern, but carrying a clear undercurrent of harsh impatience that was difficult to ignore, a small, dark cloud forming in the otherwise bright atmosphere of the afternoon. Keanu, initially absorbed in the simple pleasure of observing the world go by, found his gaze drawn to this uneasy pair. A subtle shift in his expression, a slight furrowing of his brow, indicated a growing disquiet. He was an astute observer of human nature, and the minute signals of distress from the animal, the almost imperceptible tightening of the man's jaw before a sharp tug on the leash, did not escape his notice. It was a silent, ugly language that spoke volumes to anyone willing to truly see, and Keanu was seeing more than he wished. This wasn't just firm training, it was something colder, something mean. The man, perhaps sensing an unseen judgment, or simply seeking a less trafficked spot, guided the dog towards a more secluded cluster of trees at the park's periphery. With each step, the dog's reluctance grew, its paws seeming to drag, its body language a clear plea for escape or kindness. The man's agitation, however, only seemed to intensify in this relative isolation, his movements becoming jerkier, his low grumbling more pronounced. It was as if the perceived privacy granted him a license for behavior he might otherwise temper, a common prelude to actions one prefers to keep hidden from disapproving eyes. Many parkgoers remained blissfully unaware, lost in their own activities, a frisbee game here, a picnic there. A few might have cast a fleeting glance towards the man and his cowering dog, perhaps registering a momentary flicker of discomfort before their attention drifted. This was the common tapestry of public life, where the urge not to get involved often outweighs the nudge of conscience, creating pockets of isolation where unkindness could fester, unseen or deliberately ignored by the many who preferred to maintain their comfortable bubble of detachment from the unpleasantries of the world. All the simmering tension then coalesced into a single, ugly moment. The dog, perhaps in a bid to sniff a captivating scent, or simply out of nervous energy, paused for a fraction of a second longer than its owner deemed acceptable. The man's face, already a mask of irritation, contorted into a dark scowl. He stopped abruptly, his body coiling like a spring. There was a palpable stillness, the kind that often precedes a sudden burst of violence, a silent, dreadful intake of breath before the day's fragile peace was irrevocably shattered by a single brutal act. With a sudden, vicious movement, the man kicked the dog hard in its side. The sickening thud of the impact, followed by a piercing yelp from the terrified animal, ripped through the park's gentle ambience like a gunshot. The dog tumbled, scrambling to its feet with a painful whimper, its body trembling uncontrollably. The sheer, unexpected brutality of the act hung heavy in the air, a raw wound in the fabric of the afternoon, leaving a stain of shock and disbelief on the otherwise pleasant day. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated cruelty, naked and appalling for all to witness. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of frozen disbelief. A nearby couple gasped, hands flying to their mouths, but they remained rooted to their picnic blanket. An elderly gentleman on a bench lowered his newspaper, his face a mask of disapproval, yet he uttered no word. It was the classic bystander, effect in motion. Shock rendered people immobile, unsure, unwilling to be the first to break the spell of inaction. The park, a moment ago a place of shared joy, now felt charged with a collective, unspoken horror and a paralyzing sense of helplessness that was almost as disturbing as the act itself. Keanu felt the impact as if it were a physical blow. A wave of hot anger surged through him, followed by a chilling disbelief. His usually calm features tightened, his eyes, often so gentle, now glinted with a fierce, protective indignation. This was not a movie. There were no stunt coordinators, no retakes. This was real, ugly, and happening now, His mind raced, grappling with the impulse to charge forward and the potential complications his fame might ignite, the desire to shield the vulnerable warring with the need to avoid escalating the situation into a spectacle. The abuser, meanwhile, seemed almost to revel in the malkit he had asserted. He glared down at the cowering dog, then cast a defiant look around, as if daring anyone to challenge his perceived right to discipline his animal as he saw fit. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a brutish assertion of dominance, perhaps a flicker of satisfaction at the fear he had instilled. He tugged harshly on the leash again, a clear indication that, for the dog, the torment was likely far from over, his posture one of arrogant impunity in the face of silent, disapproving onlookers. The sight of the dog's utter terror, its small body still shaking from the blow and the subsequent rough handling, finally broke through Keanu's momentary hesitation. A quiet resolve settled upon him. He could not, would not, remain a passive observer to such blatant cruelty. He took a determined breath, his focus narrowing entirely on the abuser and the suffering animal. He began to move, a purposeful stride, eating up the distance between them, his mind already formulating the words he would use, the calm but unyielding stance he would take to protect the innocent. Just as Keanu was steeling himself for the confrontation, the abuser, emboldened by the park's general passivity, yanked the dog cruelly once more, dragging it a few feet. The animal let out another small, stifled cry, a sound that seemed to amplify the urgency of the moment. It was clear that the man's temper was still frayed, and the potential for further violence hung precariously in the air, a dark promise of more pain for the defenseless creature, whose only crime was to be at the mercy of such a callous owner. The situation felt like a powder keg, needing only a spark. Across the sprawling green, a small group of men, previously engaged in quiet conversation on a set of benches near the park's edge, began to stir. They were older, their faces etched with the lines of experience, their demeanor unassuming. They had been part of the park's background scenery until now, unremarkable, just a few regular guys enjoying the afternoon. There was nothing about their initial appearance that screamed hero, no capes, no dramatic fanfare, just the quiet presence of individuals who had perhaps seen more of the world's harshness than most. A young woman walking nearby had also clearly witnessed the latest act of aggression. She opened her mouth as if to speak, her face filled with indignation, took a hesitant step forward, but then visibly deflated. She glanced at the burly abuser, then around at the other passive onlookers, a flicker of fear and uncertainty crossing her features. With a sigh of frustration and helplessness, she ultimately turned away, a silent testament to how daunting it could be for one person to confront aggression alone, especially when no one else seemed willing to stand with them. The abuser, seemingly oblivious or perhaps even fueled by the lack of direct challenge, let out a self-important huff. He muttered something about stupid mutts, and gave the leash another unnecessary jerk, the poor dog stumbling to keep up. His confidence, if anything, seemed to have solidified. The park was his domain, the dog his property to treat as he pleased. The animal, in turn, looked utterly broken, its spirit momentarily extinguished, a small, furry emblem of despair in the midst of a sunny afternoon that had turned so dark for it. Keanu, now only a dozen feet away from the abuser, was about to call out, his voice ready to cut through the man's callousness, but something made him pause. His gaze was drawn beyond the abuser to the group of older men. He saw a subtle shift in their collective posture. One of them, who had been idly watching the ducks in the pond, was now looking directly at the unfolding drama with a keen, unwavering focus. There was a sudden stillness about them, an alertness that hadn't been there moments before. Keanu sensed a change in the park's subtle currents. A silent language passed between the men on the benches, a shared look, a barely perceptible nod from one to another. It was the communication of those long accustomed to understanding each other without words, a silent consensus reached in an instant. Then, with a synchronicity that spoke of shared purpose, they began to rise from their seats. Not with haste or aggression, but with a slow, deliberate movement that nonetheless carried an undeniable weight, a sense of impending measured action that was far more formidable than any loud outburst. The veterans, for that is what their bearing increasingly suggested, moved towards the abuser with a calm, unhurried pace. They didn't fan out in an intimidating manner, but walked with a quiet solidarity, their presence alone beginning to alter the atmosphere around the unfolding incident. Their age, combined with an indefinable aura of resilience and quiet strength, projected an authority that was palpable even before a single word was spoken. They were not looking for a fight. They were simply moving to address a wrong, a palpable sense of duty in their measured steps. The abuser, initially scowling at this new interruption, seemed to size them up with a dismissive sneer. "Something I can help you with, grandpas?" he asked, his tone laced with a belligerent sarcasm, clearly underestimating the nature of the men approaching him. He likely expected them to be easily intimidated or brushed off, just another set of disapproving but ultimately powerless onlookers. He stood his ground, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips, ready to defend his right to mistreat his own dog. One of the veterans, a man with a kind but firm face and eyes that had seen much, stepped slightly forward. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the abuser's bravado with surprising clarity. "We saw what you did to your dog," he stated simply, his tone even, devoid of accusation, but heavy with an unspoken expectation of decency. "That's no way to treat an animal, son. That's no way at all." There were no threats, no posturing, just a clear, unambiguous statement of fact and a moral boundary firmly drawn. Keanu, who had instinctively halted his own advance, watched this exchange with a profound sense of recognition. He saw in their steady gazes and their composed yet resolute stance a familiar kind of courage, the quiet, unwavering sort that doesn't require an audience. He understood the power of their understated approach and chose to remain a supportive witness, respecting their lead. There was a rightness to their intervention that felt complete, a sense of seasoned wisdom in action that he deeply admired. The abuser attempted to bluster his way through. "He's my dog. I'll train him how I want," he retorted, trying to reassert his dominance. But the veterans remained impassive, a united wall of quiet disapproval. They didn't raise their voices or engage in a shouting match. One of them, a tall, lean man, simply moved a little to the side, subtly placing himself between the abuser and the frightened dog, a protective gesture that spoke louder than any threat. Their silence and unwavering stance were more unnerving to the abuser than any shouted words could have been. The shift in the dynamic was undeniable. The abuser's bluster began to visibly deflate under the calm, collective gaze of the veterans. His eyes darted between them, no longer with arrogance, but with a dawning unease. He had expected anger, perhaps a heated argument he could win with volume, but this quiet, unshakable disapproval was disarming. The invisible shield of his aggression was being systematically dismantled, not by force, but by the sheer moral weight of the men standing before him, their unified presence a testament to shared values. The lead veteran spoke again, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel that left no room for misinterpretation. "That dog deserves better. We can call the park authorities and animal protection right now, or you can choose to understand that what you did was wrong and assure us it won't happen again. Your choice." He laid out the options clearly, giving the abuser a path to de-escalate, while simultaneously making the consequences of continued defiance perfectly understood. The power had decisively shifted, the initiative firmly in the hands of the calm interveners. Defeated, the abuser's shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a sullen resentment, and perhaps a sliver of shame. All right, he mumbled, avoiding their eyes, his earlier defiance completely extinguished. He tugged gently on the leash this time, a stark contrast to his earlier violence, and began to walk away, a man visibly diminished by the quiet authority he had encountered. There was no victory for him here, only the stark realization that his cruelty had not gone unchallenged, that decency had found its voice and its protectors. With the abuser retreating, the veteran's demeanor softened instantly. One of them, the man who had subtly shielded the dog, knelt down, speaking in low, soothing tones to the still trembling animal. He extended a gentle hand, letting the dog sniff it before stroking its head. The fear in the dog's eyes began to slowly recede, replaced by a tentative curiosity and the first flicker of trust. It was a small moment of profound tenderness, a balm applied to the wound of the earlier cruelty, showcasing their inherent compassion. The other park-goers, who had watched the entire interaction with rapt attention, let out a collective, quiet sigh of relief. A few clapped softly, a spontaneous show of appreciation. One woman approached the veterans, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for stepping in." Not many would. The park seemed to breathe again. The dark cloud lifted, replaced by a sense of restored order and a quiet admiration for the men who had acted so decisively and with such dignity. Keanu approached the group, his face open and sincere. He wasn't Keanu Reeves, the movie star, in that moment, but simply a grateful citizen. "That was an amazing thing you did," he said, his voice low and full of respect, extending his hand to the veteran who had first spoken. "Thank you for showing such courage and compassion." The veteran simply smiled, a humble, unassuming gesture, and shook his hand firmly. "Just doing what anyone should, son," he replied, encapsulating their simple, profound ethos. The image that lingered was one of quiet heroism. The dog, now sitting calmly by one of the veterans, even wagged its tail tentatively. The abuser was gone, his cruelty checked. The veterans, having restored a small piece of justice to the world, didn't seek accolades. They soon returned to their bench, their conversation resuming as if intervening in such a manner was the most natural thing in the world. It was a powerful reminder that true strength often speaks in a whisper, and true courage is about standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. That afternoon in the park, what began as a display of senseless cruelty transformed into an inspiring testament to everyday heroism, all witnessed by a man known for portraying heroes on screen. It underscores a vital truth. We all have the capacity to make a positive impact, to be the voice for the voiceless, much like those brave veterans. If this story of courage, compassion, and unexpected intervention resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more stories that highlight the best of humanity, and share in the comments a time when you witnessed or were part of an act of kindness that made a difference. Your story matters,